Welcome to Synchronicity. My guest this week is Starlite. You can also find her on Twitter and Instagram, Bimbo Astrology _ I think is in there. I'll get that sorted for you in the links. Really fun conversation. I've been meaning to have Starlight on for a while. I've known her for, I guess, a few years at least, from the earlier days of the podcast. Just a cool person. Always had like insightful comments and things to say and just questions. And then I saw her really getting into this Vedic astrology stuff. And I was like, oh, she really seems like she's getting something here. Like it was presented in a way that was accessible for me, enough for me to be like, here's the thing with Vedic astrology. It is complex. You'll hear in this conversation, it's not like, listen, regular astrology, whatever regular quote unquote astrology is complex. And Vedic astrology takes it to another level. You're using sidereal castings instead of tropical, so everything is already shifted, which brings up the eternal question of how real is this stuff if one day I'm a Libra and one day I'm a Scorpio, or one day I'm a Cancer and one day I'm a Taurus. That would be weird. But Gemini, it kind of fucks with people's heads. And we get into that. Like we get into how, the divine arts, astrology, tarot, these types of things can be valid for you as a person. And she has a really nice perspective on how to kind of look at astrology as a tool that can actually help you and be something that's practical, which we like practical things. So I think you're going to like this conversation. It's fun times. All right. Few things. Patreon. Rocking. We are smashing goals and boundaries there. I am happy to see. Sometimes like you get stuck on like an Instagram follower threshold, right? This happens for me. I don't know. I don't buy followers, so I don't know how it works. But basically, you get stuck somewhere and you're like, oh no, like what do I do? It's not going past. Patreon is the opposite of that. It just keeps blowing through. I'm glad people are getting it. We have bonus episodes every Tuesday. That's super fun. Live readings, weekly readings for tarot for the patrons. It's fun. We just have a good time, basically. So you can check that out. Christ Consciousness readings. We are now here, December 13th. There's a couple more weeks of these. There's a few more spots. There's not a ton. So I think I've limited it to 2 or 3 a day. So we have like a few more, but not a ton. If you're called to do that, they're fun. I do them every year. I do them once a year. That's it. And then also, I want to mention this, and it's maybe not for everyone, but it's maybe for people who understand it's for them, is I've recently been exploring, I've been doing these things for a while with friends and just kind of interested parties where we do basically like MDMA, not therapy sessions, but like, if you haven't done MDMA or you have, and you've taken maybe in like a recreational setting, when done with intentionality, it can actually be a pretty profound like heart opener and just kind of lets things flow in a way that maybe they otherwise wouldn't. You kind of rediscover love in certain aspects. And so I've been offering this for people who want to kind of experience that. Starting in January, I'm going to do that for interested parties. This is for 2 to 4 people. This is not a solo session. I do not want people here alone doing MDMA, in my place. That's just like not the vibe. But this is for people who are trying to like actually communicate better, want to understand themselves better, enhance their relationship with someone. This, of course, could be for people in romantic relationships. This could be for coworkers, family members. I'm opening that up. And you can say, Noah, what qualifications do you have? Well, I don't know. What qualifications do you have? I don't think people are going to have a good time. We set the vibe. It's cool stuff. We have high grade stuff. You know what I mean. Anyway, if you're interested in that for now, just shoot me a DM on Instagram or a email at noah@syncpodcast.com and I'll fill you in on the details. But I will officially be rolling this out before the new year, so you can sign up there if it's something you're interested in. And again, this is for people in the New York area. I'm a train ride away from the heart of the city, so it's doable. We can do it. So yeah, if you're interested in that, it's a weird thing, but it's kind of fun. You look at like what you like to do, and what I've just realized is communicating with people, speaking with people, helping people see things from maybe a different perspective at times seems to be something I'm not only good at, but always come away feeling kind of energized by. So that's what I'm trying to focus on. I just trying to look at the things in my life. I encourage you to do this too and find the things that are actually like, they feel like, wow, I feel good after that. Right? And that doesn't always have to be a way that you're making money, just to be clear. Just do those things. And obviously, if it can facilitate some way of making money and it feels authentic and it's a good value exchange, go for it. There's no reason it can't be. I see people doing, there was an article where, the sagers who go to houses before people buy them, like super rich people will pay these people like tens of thousands of dollars to go sage their house. Fuck yeah. Get it, girl. Do what you got to do. Sage, I've saged many a place. People want to pay you for it. You take that money and say, thank you. I appreciate it. It's just an energy exchange. That's all it is. Anyway, that's going on. That's it. I don't have anything else to say. I think you're going to enjoy this episode. Without further ado, here is Starlight. All right. Well, welcome to the show. Starlight is the name we're going with on this one. I'm super excited to speak to you about this. We've been planning this for, I feel like, over a year at some point. Like, we've just constantly kind of like bounced back, like, trying to schedule this. And, it always happens when the time is right. But I'm super excited to have you on it and talk about some astrology stuff.
Yeah, it's really, really good to be here.
Yeah. So you are someone who I look to for like Vedic astrological wisdom. And for a lot of people who don't know the difference or aren't familiar with the difference, like, how would you distinguish between like tropical and sidereal, but specifically Vedic, which is like, there's a lot going on with Vedic astrology. But if someone like just came up to you and they don't really know much about it, they maybe know their sun sign and they're tropical, like, how do you explain to people like how Vedic astrology is useful and how it differs from traditional tropical systems?
Yeah, okay, well, that's a really good question. So honestly, the answer to that would have been different when I just got into Vedic astrology than it is now. Like, once you get deep into Vedic astrology, you see that like there's so much variation within just that tradition that it's like, it's hard to even explain it succinctly. But to try to like compare it to tropical Western astrology, the biggest difference is that it's taught a lot of times, usually it's taught from a lineage. So there's a lot of like elders involved, and there's a lot of like passed down information that has come that's really old, basically. And there's a lot of spiritual tradition involved in it as well, like legit Jyotish or Vedic astrology practitioners do a lot of mantra before they do readings. There's really, the astrology is just supposed to be one piece of a much larger spiritual practice.
Right.
The biggest difference when you first get into Vedic astrology is that the signs are different. Everything's 24 degrees behind because they use the sidereal zodiac. That's the biggest mind fuck to wrap your head around at first.
Yeah.
So that's like the most obvious difference. But I think the most tactical, like practical difference is the remedies. I think that the remedial part of Vedic astrology is such a big part of it, where it's like sometimes it sounds scary to a Westerner, like, oh, like this aspect is going to like make something terrible happen, but it's really framed that way sometimes because there's something you can do about it.
Right. Yeah, I love that too about Vedic is like there are, whether it's a mantra or some action you can be taking, there is like a prescription, right? It's like an Ayurvedic kind of approach to troubles rather than just being like, hey, you got a malefic in this particular sector of your house, you're going to be fucked for so long, so just kind of ride the wave. Like, it is a very active, like, and it's also what you said, it's important to recognize, like, this is a spiritual modality, right? This isn't just like looking at something that's going on, like a weather report, but it really does have to do with kind of people's innate spirituality, which I think people in the West are beginning to kind of come into contact with. But generally it's not typically approached like that. So I love that there is like, can you get into like an example or some examples of like some of the remedial or things you can do if you get like a weird placement or kind of energies coming your way? Like what are some of the things that would be prescribed?
Yeah, so well, it's such a big, again, like a huge topic because different people will give different types of remedies. But let me think. So for example, well, okay, so Rahu is like the north node of the moon in
Right.
Western astrology, and in Vedic it's seen as sometimes like a very disturbing, malefic kind of influence. So it can be associated with like, great opportunities as well. But basically, if you have to do a Rahu remedy, instead of being scared, so say you're going to start a time period that's run by Rahu, a lot of people freak out and they're like, my life is going to just completely turn upside down, which is never the truth. What really happens is things might just become, there just might be more higher highs and lower lows, like, and sometimes you want to like own that energy and tame that energy. So there's different kinds of remedies you can do. The best thing you can do is sort of like do like the spiritual work, do the meditation, make sure that you're like in line with your spiritual path so you don't get hit with any curveballs because you made some like hasty bad choices. So that's sort of like, I think, the most practical, like preemptive way to remediate any effect of any planet. But then there's also something you can do that's more on like the external service based realm, which is like Rahu really likes reforestation. So if you say donate, I love tithing personally, tithing to like a reforestation group or an organization that plants trees. That's something you can do that will kind of just help you feel like you're doing something to help that influence, and you're doing something good when you do that.
Right, right.
But there's other ways of remedying as well, like cleaning the toilet is like something I've heard that will remedy Rahu. Or
You know, that's funny. I just did that like a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. Well, my my lovely wife pointed out like maybe you should clean your toilet, you know, because I have kids and it's just like a constant, you know,
yeah,
battle with the toilet. But I actually did that, and it did feel in like a weird way kind of like a spiritually liberating thing to do. It's not something I do very
totally.
often, but it felt like it was symbolic of something more. So it's interesting to hear you say that. Nice little synchronicity that you're bringing up there.
Totally.
That's cool.
Yeah. Well, cleaning can be very spiritual, and like
Yeah.
apparently Venus really likes, like that's a really good Venus remedy is just to clean in general too.
So how did you get kind of immersed in this world of Vedic astrology? Like what were some of the like trigger points that kind of pull? Because I've seen, you know, we've known each other for, you know, a number of years now, and I've seen you kind of like at least publicly on Twitter speak about this more, and I've seen you just kind of have what appears to be a more commanding understanding and way to communicate this stuff. Like what drew you to specifically to Vedic astrology? Like what kind of got you into that realm?
Okay, well, I've been studying astrology since I was like 12, so I've
Yeah.
just always been into astrology. But I accidentally found a book. So there's something called nakshatras, which is
Yes.
you,
Yes.
yeah, that's like usually like the gateway that for Westerners. So basically, like 27 parts, 27 like mansions of the moon. Basically, each zodiac sign's basically divided into three parts that are like little mini signs within the signs. And I
Yeah.
found a book on this, like honestly, like a really long time ago at a used bookstore. I didn't even know about the sidereal zodiac. I got really intrigued. It was by somebody named Prash Trivedi. And I didn't, at first, I had miscalculated where my placements were because I was calculating based on the tropical zodiac. And I
Right.
was
Right.
like,
Classic.
oh, but I quickly figured it out, like, oh, and, fixed it. So I was intrigued then. That was years and years ago. But to be honest, because there was so little information about Vedic astrology at that time, it was just too confusing to be into this topic
Yeah.
and then have this different zodiac. I
Yeah.
couldn't, I just couldn't do it. So I kind of tabled it. But in the back of my mind, I was like, I don't know if I should be trusting the signs, you know? So I was like, focusing on aspects for years. And then in like 2020, I was dabbling, and I think there's this woman named Joni Patry who does these like predictions and things
Yeah.
on YouTube, and Sidereal, she used to be a tropical astrologer. She basically before in like February 2020, she was like, I don't know what's going to happen. She was predicting like a terrorist attack or something, but she
Yeah.
was like, you need to stay home. Forget the date, but it was pretty much the date that like the pandemic was
Yeah.
like, stay home. And I was like really impressed by that. And she also predicted that Trump was going to win in 2016. Nobody was predicting that.
Right.
So yeah, so that was kind of what made me be like, you know what, like I'm gonna dive in. And then of course I had like a year and a half to just study hard. So that was kind of like the trigger for going like fully into Vedic astrology.
That's cool. I think everyone, I mean, not, I don't want to say everyone because some people just haven't like even explored it at all, but it is this weird, there's almost a resistance when you've been working with a certain modality for a while, especially in like, you know, the divine arts and the metaphysical world. Like when people hear there is a completely different, not even just one, but many different ways of looking at the stars and the planets and the ethereal bodies, when we're used to one way of kind of doing it, and then our perspective is shifted, right? It's like it takes some time to process it, right? It isn't always just like a full sail, yeah, this makes perfect sense. And that's certainly kind of been my relationship with Vedic astrology. Some of the best readings I've ever received, astrological readings, have been purely Vedic, like nothing to do with tropical. And I always found there to kind of just be this deep mystical component to them. But again, like trying to break through that initial barrier into that realm, it is intimidating and it is daunting and it can be confusing, right? When you're talking even about like nakshatras, like these are lunar nodes that are fixed places that, you know, correspond to different energies within the signs. And like for a lot of people, astrology just with the housing system is complicated. So you add all of these other facets and Rahu and Ketu and all of these things, and you're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? So like, what kind of made this make sense to you? I know this is kind of a weird question, but like, you know, like what kind of helped put this together in your mind that this was a system that not only held potential value, but really was like an effective way of looking at astrology?
Well, first of all, like I've always been a skeptic of astrology. I
Yeah,
always have been like, is this even a thing? And I like,
totally. Totally.
and also I'm not like I'm like, I wanted to ask you at some point, like your thoughts on like free will also. Cause like,
Sure.
I'm not a big, I don't like the fatalistic point of view on these things, but so I don't know if things ever really make sense to me.
Great.
One,
Yeah,
one,
yeah, yeah.
one thing about Vedic that's cool though is it gets more and more complex the more you get into it. So you kind of hit a wall where you're like, oh, you're not obsessed with feeling like you understand it all, because you'll never understand it all.
Right.
Like, because they go into so many mathematical calculations of like, it just, the math keeps getting deeper and deeper. It never ends. So there's a really cool like point of just sort of like where you're kind of just on the path of inquiry, but you don't feel
Yeah.
like you've nailed it. So that's kind of where I live. Like, I don't really think I've figured anything out. But what helps me mentally understand, and I don't know if this is really your question, but basically the tropical zodiac is based on this equinoxes. So it's not that it's not legitimate, it's just not aligned with a constellation. So
Right.
tropical Aries is not on the Aries constellation. But it is aligned with the spring equinox point. And the thing about the tropical zodiac that it has going for it is it doesn't move, because the equinox points don't move.
Right.
So it's something, you know, when we see those cardinal points like tropical 0 degrees Aries, like that's a real point in the sky. For me, the issue is linguistic. We're calling it Aries. It's a linguistic research nightmare to have two different groups of people being called the same thing.
Totally.
so that for me has, and so the thing that's been the most of a breakthrough for me is relabeling in my mind, like, what is a early spring baby? Because I'm an early spring baby. I always hated being called an Aries, so it was kind of easy for me to be like, I always like insisted I was a Pisces because I'm
Right.
like on the cusp.
Right.
And so it's easy for me to make that switch of like, oh, I'm a Pisces, but it's like I'm an early spring. It's an energy. Early spring is still an energy, but I'm a Pisces sidereally.
Right.
So a lot of thinking, and it takes a lot of time to be able to integrate all these different categories. So I don't know if anything ever just like clicked and started making sense, but just constant being curious about it for so many years has
Right.
helped.
Right. It's like you got immersed and curious and excited about something for long enough that you basically just aligned with it. You don't have to fully understand why or the every aspect of the infinite complexity that it has to offer. But like when it feels right, it feels right. And I think a lot of times when we're dealing with, like, I refer to astrology as like a divine art, right? It is in some way divination in the purest sense, trying to get in touch with the larger aspect of everything, the universe, God, whatever you would like to call it, and our relationship to that and where we fit in, and also related to the world at large and relationships and all the things we go through as beings on this planet. And it is a very like felt process. It's not something even that intellectually is like packaged and reasoned together. Like that certainly was my journey into astrology and tarot specifically. Like these are things that I had intellectually kind of understood were out there and could see that they were something, but never could actually understand them or feel what that meant. And then, it happened. It was just like something like, oh, I get what the energies behind these things are. It really starts like, I feel that it makes sense. I don't know exactly why it makes sense, but I feel whatever the thrust and the energy behind this is. And I think in Vedic astrology particularly, I've noticed like that is kind of baked into it, right? It is kind of like this spiritual journey and a map we kind of get to discern certain aspects of it. It's always kind of felt like, and I know there are specific energies like dealing with like gurus and specifically past lives, and all of these concepts are very tricky in a lot of ways because I get asked this a lot, like, what do you believe about past lives, or different dimensions and all of timeline jumping. And it's like, for me, until I find something that negates this, it just seems to be like all of it is real, all of it is illusory. It's where you align kind of your beliefs and your feelings that determine the reality of any of those things. Like that will be your experience. If you are a defined scientific materialist who denies any aspect of consciousness to affect reality, then that is probably what you are going to see in life. Like regardless of how magical and numinous it is to the person standing next to you, your perspective is fundamentally going to shape your experience of the thing. But I think we get drawn to certain things that feel authentic, or we feel connected to, or they make sense for us on some level that sometimes we can't even explain. And to negate that also feels incorrect. Like to be like, well, everything is just what we make of it, so nothing is really real. So why should I waste my time, getting into astrology or tarot or whatever it is? And it's like, yeah, but if you're naturally being drawn to something, your curiosity is trying to reveal something to you, right? So at least pursue it. And so, yeah, it's like, I guess it's kind of hedging your bets when I say like, ultimately, do I believe that like the planets and the stars are making your life this way? No, I really don't believe that. I think if I did believe that fully, then that probably would be way more of a prominent effect on my life. But do I believe that these energies absolutely, just by the physical properties of energies that are being emitted from them, would have some type of subtle impact on like our cellular structure or our consciousness? Like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me too. So it's why I tend to use these things as kind of like roadmaps, but always kind of in the back of my head, saying, you know, like take it with a grain of salt. Like don't necessarily fully invest that this is dictating the terms of your life. I always tell people before readings,
Absolutely.
like, you know, if this feels like it's going to bind you or constrict you or like make you feel like this is what's going to happen no matter what, like that's not the point. You'll
Yeah.
never hear that from me in a reading. And
No.
even if those signs are there that there may be some, like, you know, going through the trial and tribulations package for a little bit, it's not something that is deterministic. It is, at least that's my
No.
conception on it. So yeah, I mean, I definitely get where you're coming from on that.
Yeah, actually, my favorite way to look at astrology is I find it really awkward when people want me to do readings as a gift. So it's like I don't really know what the person getting the reading, like where they're at or what they want,
Yeah.
because I feel like that for me that's such an important first step. Like I want to know what you want, and like because really I don't see the chart as anything more than like an obstacle course. So like it
Mm,
could go in like 30 different directions. Like I could have like a Saturn Venus. I have a Saturn Venus aspect, and that could look so many different ways.
yeah.
And so the way I like to see astrology is say somebody has a Saturn Venus aspect, but they really want to have like a really happy marriage. Then instead of saying, oh, like this chart shows a bad marriage or whatever, then you say, how
Mm,
can I on purpose implement, which by the way I'm not saying that that aspect shows that, but just as an example. But
yeah.
like how can I implement on purpose Saturn's energy so that I'm satisfying this part of my chart so that I can
Right.
get what I want. So it kind of gives you that information of like this energy wants to make itself present for you right now, or like if you have a transit right now, like right now Rahu's in your life, so how can you welcome in Rahu so it's working for you in the way that you want instead of just catching you off guard, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like what astrology in particular has to offer. Like I'm a big archetypal astrologer, like that, those energies of those deities, of those planets, of those kind of celestial bodies, like they represent archetypal energies, feelings, things that we can't even really express with words, but nevertheless really do shape and kind of guide where we're going. And, you know, who wouldn't want to know that being able to take a long arc macro view of your life and see where kind of, you know, these stories and narratives have been shaping your behavior or relationships, like who wouldn't want to have the ability to kind of know that that's something that's not more important, but like worthwhile investigating if you are in a relationship that is affected by a certain aspect. Like it's not like this equals bad marriage. It just means
No,
that like
yeah.
there are going to be energies potentially involved in these relationships where if you know, are in this relationship and are committed and, you know, love the person, would want to kind of be aware of. So you could say, well, you know, it's like getting your traumas out on the table in a lot of ways. Like if you're open and communicative about where you struggle and, you know, what you can do to like help yourself work through those things with a partner, that's just going to make the relationship work a little bit better. It's going to be a more honest platform for communication. And like, astrology does have this ability to show us areas of our lives because of this system related to houses and planets and the relationships between those. Like there's a lot of info there. And I think one of the reasons it endures as prominently as it has, not to mention that it was like, it did start at the same time as astronomy. Astronomers typically will omit that fact and act like they were completely different sciences, but they literally came from the same place. You know, these are things that like absolutely are available to give us insight into our lives. And I think like that's the game that we're all playing, right? Like we, rather than feeling
Yes.
like you are controlled by energies, being aware of what tendencies and energetic patterns make up your experience of life, and then how to kind of, once you are more aware of those, play with them or come at it from a shift in perspective that maybe feels like it's going to be a little bit more in flow rather than fighting against something.
Totally. But also like I feel like you're like one of the only people, probably the only person that I would ever get a reading from, because you share my worldview of like we want to be inspired. We want to create our reality. So like,
Right.
I don't actually think astrology is that helpful if a person have isn't in touch with their genuine inspiration. And I think
Yeah.
it's like some people are really inspired by astrology and some people just don't find it inspiring. And
Yeah.
I feel like there's something really valuable about knowing, like, just about getting a reading and having it empower you in some way. And that's going to look different for different people. Or maybe some people just won't be empowered at all by a reading. Like, I'm usually not empowered by readings. I find them stressful. I find honestly, I think good predictions can be even more dangerous than bad predictions. You know, predictions in general, I feel like are almost like outrageous, like
Yeah.
audacious, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Totally.
but like that, being able to prepare for something is a really valuable to say, oh, Saturn might come over your moon in a year, so
Exactly.
you might want to save money right now. And like, you know, there's ways you can start getting on good terms with Saturn to make this a really cool aspect instead of one that's typically associated with struggle.
Yeah, I could have used a lot of this insight over the past 2 years. Let me tell you that it would have been really,
Yeah.
really useful. But you know, we all go through kind of our situations. I personally feel like to offer us the most, so we can learn the most and like actually gain true insight and wisdom on energies we're interested in learning about. I think that's, if our life is nothing else, like our awareness has drawn us to all of the situations and experiences in our lives. So like maybe pay attention to why that is driving you or where it's driving you towards or what generally excites you too. Like you mentioned that, like that's the hallmark of doing the right thing, being in the right place. It's like if you are excited and curious and interested in things, that naturally leads to a place of fulfillment on some level, in my experience, right?
Yeah, and also depending on like how tapped in you are, I guess. So this gets into like the Rahu Ketu conversation, but
Mm.
it can take people to a place where they think they're chasing something they think they want, and then it can have this like crash and burn effect.
Yeah,
And
I had that.
yeah, it sounds like it. And honestly, some people's lives, and I think people who have malefics in their quadrant houses tend to have more like high highs and low lows.
Yeah.
So that is just a thing, you know, and it's yeah, it's I wanted to ask you,
Yeah.
so you said that you forgot about the imagination creating reality or something along those lines. Like you said, there was a point where you kind of like forgot about that, or you disconnected from that.
Disconnected, probably the best word there. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I was just curious, like, I don't know, that just makes, I find that, I just found that really interesting, and I was wondering, like, how you remembered it again, or how you reconnected with that,
Well,
because I think it
yeah,
happens so often. It's such a thing
it
that
does.
happens with
And
people.
I think it's important to acknowledge that too. And I think, especially in my case, it can really serve as a reminder of that, because I'm inundated with this stuff constantly, right? Just from having the podcast, speaking about this prominently for X number of years, like I'm constantly getting emails, messages, feedback of, you know, examples that this is how reality works. But for me, I think it started to turn into almost like a fight or flight response to life. Like I was very much operating from like my root chakra, right? Muladhara, like security, safety, you know, base level survival stuff. And I think when your consciousness is relegated to those areas, typically, like it's not that like you're not doing the thing. Like I've always said this, and I do believe it's like just because you're not actively using your imagination to affect or, you know, change your reality in some way or your experience of it, it doesn't mean that that's turned off. It doesn't mean that it went
Right.
away. It doesn't mean like that's still not the active mechanism of what we're calling our experience of life. It's just we can forget that we do have any degree of influence or command over that. And if you get in, like, we're so shaped by habits and patterns, that when you get into a routine of just reacting constantly, like, I noticed, like, the realizations that came out of this for me were the intimate link between reactivity and lack of presence. Like, it is very easy to react to situations and forget everything else and get tunnel vision when we're not present in our situations, when we're not really like feeling the moment that we're in and the preciousness of that in some way, not to be corny about it, but like the kind of sacredness of every moment of life. And it's hard to feel like that for most people when you just feel like you're getting slammed with experiences, conditions, relationships, whatever it is in your life that feels to be really an external circumstance. And you start to buy into it, right? You start to say, like, this is what my life is going, like, oh, well, maybe I thought I knew that this is how it worked, but here I am in this situation that is invalidating that experience. And obviously or maybe not so obviously, when you can take a step back and get a broader kind of bird's eye view of your life, you do see that still is absolutely what's going on. Just because you may be through some, heavy obstacles and shitstorms in your path doesn't mean that was like an act of hate towards yourself. It's usually a wake up call, right? And sometimes you do have to kind of like just get slammed so hard in so many particular ways that like you're just like, all right, like I get it, like enough, like I understand, like, and you kind of laugh at it in a weird way. And I just think that lightness comes with curiosity, right? Like that playful inquisition just comes from a lighter place. So, it wasn't easy. I mean, it's essentially like we can frame it also as like being disconnected from your imagination, but I essentially get depressed when I don't feel connected to that active principle. Like it becomes a depressing existence for me. And I think it's important for people to kind of be aware of that frequency. And sometimes we have to go through it to some degree or another to like really understand it. So it's not a bad thing, but it can, it can grip people for substantial periods of time. And for me, a year and a half, verging on 2 years of that type of energy feels like lifetimes for me. It feels like that's my entire existence. It's even hard to get out of that. So, I think it's important to acknowledge that we do kind of fall out of resonance with that as a known fact. And some of us are better at remembering it. But I also think that's why, like, there are a lot of people out there who recognize when they're catching a certain vibe, like put it out for people to access. Because when you're not feeling so great and you hear someone else who can relate to your situation and also still say, like, you know what? Like, it's all right. Like, it's okay. Like, I'm not saying you're doing something wrong or you're not supposed to feel like this, but just remember there also is this perspective which you can test out and you can play around with and see if it has some sway over your reality. Like, that's kind of the game approach to it. Yeah.
Do you feel like it's a natural response? I might be like misinterpreting your situation,
No.
but do you feel like it's just a natural response to when you start like getting the things that you want, like the manifestations in the real world, like the job and the house and the relationship and the kids or whatever it is?
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's sort of natural for us to kind of attach to those things and become less sort of like internally focused?
Yes.
That's kind of, because it seems just like it's not like, because I heard Renee Garcia talking about this recently too, and she's like very good at, she's like the reality transurfing queen. So I feel like there's something to that. And I also just want to say, like, the place that you were in 2019 when you were talking about Neville Goddard and stuff, like I had a really rough eclipse season, like 2019, like the summer right before that. And you were like, you and Jessa were like so good. That energy was so good for me. So it might to some people have seemed like, magical
Of
thinking, but
course.
that type of energy is helpful for me. Like that's what I respond to. So I just wanted to like go on record saying that like that was good. What was happening that was good. I don't what happened, you know, what happened after is probably like a natural course of like the magical journey or whatever. But yeah, I just wanted to like
No, and
give you a shout out.
I appreciate it because like it's weird for me as the person who's gone through kind of like, I know qualitatively, you know, how I feel at any given time, and I know what that energy was, and it was really a blessing for me. And I was happy that I could kind of capture it and extemporaneously speak about it as it was taking place. I don't in any way ever look at that like I had an incomplete or incorrect assessment of reality or how it works. I think that is just one aspect of the spectrum of where we can be. And I think that is useful and it's wonderful. And I certainly phase in and out of it for periods of my life. Like I am sure that same kind of bright-eyed, magical, wonderful universe thinking will permeate my being, you know, at many times in my life going forward. But I also recognize that that's usually not how people experience life for all of it, right? It is not. And what I became kind of interested in is how do we maintain our awareness of that as a reality, where even if it's not our direct experience or we're not feeling so infused with like pure cosmic light love energy, if we're not there, how do we still find a place of like tranquility and balance? And also like, how do we find the beauty and kind of the amazingness of difficulty and tragedy and struggle, and not discount them as like negative, shitty things that we just want to not have to deal with? Because of course, when that's your approach, you tend to get those things. But
well, that's where I feel, so I have a lot of eighth house stuff. So I feel like my everyday is like rapid cycle of like macabre and then like really idealistic and then everything's terrible. So like, I feel like just sharing exactly like how you feel and like putting it all out on the table and being dramatic and being playful with your darkness. That's my answer to
it's
that.
Smart. It's a healthy response. Like that's actual shadow work. I think that when we deal with like kind of the shadow stuff, like we get apprehensive at times and we get fearful and doubt and shame, and these things can come in. And obviously it's not our natural tendency for most people, because this is not how society typically, how we interact with each other. But like, we don't put that on full display. We don't share it. We don't say, hey, here are all my issues and my fuck ups and my problems. Because obviously like it's a place of vulnerability, right? And we are not naturally very vulnerable in our interactions with society. It's rarer.
Well, it depends. And that's something you can see astrologically is like and this is my like passion. It's like you can see how people want to see you and what type of behavior they congratulate in you. There's this one chart in Vedic astrology called the Arudhalagna, which is like your public image. So I think like I have the advantage of like, I'd actually do better when I'm like on the fringes, so I can kind of act however I want. But some people get so rewarded for following the rules and doing things right. And I can understand how, if that's where your support is coming from being this like role model or someone that seems really responsible or something, then that would actually be really risky to show all of your weird toxic emotions all the time.
I mean, it is. I mean, like that's not typically sought after in professional and, you know, romantic endeavors. I mean, it's just, it's not you're not putting that on your Tinder or LinkedIn bios. But I mean, you know, like it is. I don't know any other way to be, is the truth. And I think that's why a lot of us who kind of find ourselves like maybe more on the fringes or in between the boundaries of like traditional career or interests or hobbies or what we do for fun, whatever it is, it's almost for lack of like a better choice in some ways. And like, obviously we can create very cool things in those boundaries, but like, I don't know how to kind of like, I can obviously self-regulate behavior, but I do feel the benefits from like getting this stuff out and like having it be
Oh,
like a
for
cathartic
sure.
experience, because God knows like how fucked up I would be if I didn't do that. Because like
Yeah.
it's like, I mean, I there's still stuff that, you know, gets lodged into your psyche and the unconscious that, you know, we can sense is there, but maybe we don't really know how to deal with it. Like, and I'm letting a lot of stuff out. I can't imagine if I was, you
Yeah.
know, but it's just our experiences, right, in life.
I think people like, honestly, I think the world is just headed there. Like it might make you like lose a corporate job or something. Like I can't speak on that, but I think in general people, it's the same thing with like enlightened selfishness or whatever, which I feel
Yeah,
like selfishness is selfless because like nobody wants
totally.
you to be, yeah, like so it's like people love it if you are taking care of yourself, even though some people who don't take care of themselves might be offended at first. Ultimately people love it because they're like, can I do that too? And you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
like we love each other by doing what we want to do. And
Hmm.
like, I don't know, I feel like we can all experiment more with like just being like like absurdly honest about how we're feeling. That's just my stance because I think the world needs that on such a deep level. Like,
For sure. I mean, like, that is basically the biggest challenge of, like, if we're looking at kind of the interplay of masculine and feminine energy playing out on a global stage, like, that is what everyone is. It's why, personally, I believe, like, Trump resonated with so many people, and that's inconceivable for people because, like, they see him as a charlatan and as a liar, but there was something upfront about how he was. Like, he wasn't even trying to hide it, you know, like he wasn't in any way even pretending not to be
totally.
this type of like brash kind of cheaty, scummy, scammy guy. And like that, we're so lost from like a sense of honesty and authenticity that even when we see it in like a not great form where like you shouldn't want to put all of these like qualities on display, people respond to it naturally because like it's it's not it's just not a really an accurate representation of like how we all navigate our individual lives and like what creates the structures that we find ourselves in to no small extent. So like honesty is a natural antidote to that. But it can be scary, right? I mean, it's the first person you have to be honest with is yourself, which can deal with a lot of kind of big psychological, mental, and emotional battles, which you know, is difficult. I think for a lot of people, we try to build up a stable sense of ego, or and not an ego in a bad way, but just a sense of self and identity because it helps us navigate the world. Like that is something that it is true, but if you extend that too far and then solidify those aspects of identity when they're challenged internally or externally, it can really put you in like a pickle, right? It can be very difficult to kind of reconcile what's going on, and I understand that that's naturally one of the resistances for people kind of really just showing their authentic selves, right? And I get that, like I understand where it comes from. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
it's the idea of attachment is really interesting. One thing I really I have a lot of like anxiety in general, and I've a lot of that has gone away since I have been more into Vedic astrology
Mm,
because their tradition is so old and so connected with Hinduism that
yeah.
there are these interesting ideas of like it's like you're not trying to avoid death, you're trying like meditation. I might be like getting this wrong, but I think I get it right. It's like basically when you're meditating, you're practicing to be very peaceful when you die. Like it's very important that you be
Mm,
very peaceful when you die. It's not important that you don't die, it's important that you go to the right place after, and so you have to like master this peaceful place. And
mm,
something about that really like just has calmed so much anxiety in me because there's this really auspicious energy of like being no one and having nothing but just being at peace. And there's something about like losing yourself and losing your ego and losing your identity and not having anything and not having any money, that's like very spiritually exalted in a certain kind of sense. And I don't know if I'm like making sense, but there's something about that and the spiritual practice around that that seems to be like a really good like antidote to this, to these issues that come up with like the success of having a really strong ego and having all of the material trappings, and then like the other side of that, which is like the repressed, compartmentalized shadow. Because if you let your shadow out, you could fuck up your whole reputation, you could fuck up your family, you could fuck up. But through that like spiritual practice, it's like, no, like this is, it's like you're somehow equalizing all of it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Getting to the concept of non-attachment too is like a natural kind of remedy for clinging to things, or like even whether it's a sense of self or material positions. And again, I'm not someone who like bashes enjoying your life and all of the beauty. Like there's enough of my Venus and Virgo placements that like I recognize is it Leo? Leo, of course, it's sidereal. Leo. No, I mean there's enough of that Venusian energy that like I appreciate the finer things in life in a lot of ways, that I don't think it's just if you're born in the West.
Well, you're a Libra in sidereal too, just FYI, but go ahead.
I'm a Libra rising. I know, instead of Scorpio.
So that would make it your chart ruler. So yes, just supporting what you're saying. Yeah.
It makes sense to me. It just feels like I don't have an aversion to the material aspect. And it also just makes sense to me if we find ourselves in a material world that there would be some connection there to be appreciated and not just completely thrown away. But I also recognize that recognizing the illusoriness of this plane of existence, that it is a temporary place, right? There, it is a finite existence in that sense of like you are alive, then you're dead. We're not talking about any of the Bardo states or anything outside of that, but that it is a temporary kind of journey through time. That it makes a lot of sense to not get too attached to any aspect of this reality, because it would naturally bring out some anxiety or fear or clingingness. And I think life, like death and life, are intimately linked, and they both prepare us for the other. And it doesn't really forget that, because when we're living, we're like, oh, I'm alive, I hope this death thing doesn't come. And when we're dead, we're like probably not thinking about, oh, well, it's going to be, this is what everything's going to be like when I'm living. We're dead. So we're waiting to reincarnate in that sense. But they teach us so much about each other, and being able to let things fall away while we're living is such a key. Like, don't, like, if you fight that, good luck. It's going to be a very painful existence, because that is life. But it's not like sad. It's not bad. It's just a natural process that if you can find beauty in it, really is like, it helps kind of almost imbue your existence with a natural kind of magical resonance. I feel like it teaches you about the specialness of what you're going through, and not just like it's this slog to get through, and then you do some stuff and then you die. Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of like there's a reality transurfing thing about finding the benefit. It's something about finding the benefit in any experience. It's kind of like a trick for getting out of a rut. And
yes,
to me, it's just kind of like that. It's like, theoretically, like, yeah, you're here to enjoy things. You're here to figure out how to get things. And then there might come a time when something is taken away from you, or when you go through a transformation that's painful. But then you get to say, oh, like, that's like, I've been listening to like information about like the tantric deities, where they say like there's like, find the joy in suffering, because when you suffer, you're having a spiritual transformation. You're going to come out with a new superpower. That's not their language, but like there's something about like, oh, is it this time now? Let me find the perk to this time.
Well, I can tell you I've had some time to spend in that realm, and I can tell you that, yeah, that's really what it feels like to me. It does. And I want to be clear, like, when you find yourself in suffering or immersed in tragedy, I don't think either of us are suggesting that you immediately recognize the immense opportunity and profound transformational power that can have. Also feel what it is. Become familiar with that. It's often why when people are around the dying, it gives them a renewed sense of energy and vigor for living, because like you're
Yeah.
seeing the relationship between those things, and it's harder to forget that one is tacitly implied with the other. And so yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying about the superpower thing. It's true, and it takes time sometimes to get to that realization, but like that's awesome. Like you become a more holistic being when you go through those experiences. And yeah, no, I get what you're saying. It's pretty cool.
Well, yeah, like just real quick, like Kali, people, she's scary to people. People are usually scared of her, but her job is to remove your fear. So
I
like,
know.
I think that's an interesting paradox. Is like being able to be fearless is like such a flex, and sometimes you have to go through some shit to like
Right.
get there.
And
Yeah.
that was a big vibe of what I was, my downloads were in 2019, 2020, is the fearlessness and like kind of the courage you take to move forward. And so like, when you kind of get disconnected from that, it becomes more of a trying battle for some of us rather than something you can just embrace and move forward. And it's funny, Kali Ma was one of the major deities that like I was absolutely channeling and like studying and revisiting in a lot of ways back then, because she is the remover and the destroyer, and it is scary at times when that happens and unsettling. But like you said, it's a benevolent, even though wrathful, a benevolent aspect of the divine, and we can use that for our benefit in like harmony with that type of archetypal energy. Where does Kali show up like in Vedic astrology? Like, what, does she have a place where she is like hanging out, ruling over?
Yeah. Well, so there's a lot of Vedic astrologers will tell you to not ever do anything with the Mahavidyas,
Totally.
so there's that. And so like to each their own with how they would like to, whether or not they want to like do mantras for them or whatever. But what I've learned is that it's the moon Saturn aspect that really signifies the Kali. So each different aspects have like different deities that are associated with them. However, any deity is good. I love deities. It's like if you love a deity and you worship that deity, you're good. You probably don't need to have your chart read at all. Just like
Yeah.
do that. But Kali is, I think, typically associated with, I think also like a dark moon. But it's that moon Saturn combination, which is a really intense
I was
combination.
gonna say that's like incredibly intense to have
Yeah.
that combo running around. Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually been so humbled because I do have kind of this like rapid cycling mood thing where it's easy for me to get inspired and sort of I'm always constantly looking how to get out of this. Like if I'm in a bad place, I
Yes.
want to get out of it. And
Same.
I know it's why I love you. So I'm like, okay, like this is so good. It's like so important to me, but some people can't. Like my sister's like this, and I'll get frustrated with them. I'm like, why are you, so you're just shut down and sad. Great. What am I supposed to do? I want to help you. And what I realized is it's just a different process. And there's some people require more time, more patience. They're actually more, the cynicism is providing a role for them. And a lot of times
Yeah.
people with that moon Saturn combination have that, but they're also really like rocks a lot of the time. They're really successful. They're really given a lot of responsibility. They take responsibility. So in a way, learning about astrology is really humbling because you can see where some people are just structured differently. They process differently. And those same challenges oftentimes come with almost every time come with a very specific strength. And that's actually leads me to something I wanted to point out too, which is that in Vedic astrology, we call it a planet is cursed if it's getting aspected by more than one malefic, wrong language. So it's like,
Yeah.
oh, like I have a cursed Venus or whatever. And then it's intense. But then there's something called like a Raj Yoga when you have this combination that's like really good and will bring you like fortune and all of these blessings. But what I've learned recently is it's the curse that activates the Raj Yoga. So you need both. If you have a good combination, it's not going to get activated unless you have a really fucked up combination somewhere else. So that's so exciting to me.
It like stimulates the thing that needs to be activated. It's like the act. Yeah, it makes sense. It's the activator. I mean, and that is like typically for me, even though if it would not be my conscious preference, been true so many times. Like, I think that's so like, and you get to relate ultimately like how much you would like that to be a strategy that you run. That's what I'm always kind of trying to remind myself and speak about it. Like, when you get the message, you can hang up the phone. These things don't have to be ingrained patterns that you can't transmute into other energy. It's just, there are aspects and patterns that absolutely seem to be played out, and it is a combination of the conditions that maybe we find ourselves in just kind of energetically, not as a definer, but that combination of your own consciousness being aware of that is the game. It is what we play. So, yeah.
Transmutation is the whole point. Like if you can't,
Right.
if you don't have control over the way that these things play out, then there's really no point.
What's the point, right? This is kind of like I get in this age-old debate now with my wife because she essentially, and I don't want to put words in her mouth or butcher her philosophy on this, but is very not anti-free will, but feels like choice doesn't actually exist. And that,
Interesting.
yeah, I mean, you can imagine how I feel about that, which is you're wrong. But like,
Wait, so does that make her feel depressed, or is she okay with it?
She seems to have like a very nuanced and subtle understanding of what that means for her. And it doesn't completely leave her in a cynical state of mind. But I do question how one can believe that and then still navigate and experience life with like a high degree of joy or like the capacity for that, because it is to me that sounds awful. Like it sounds like, just not even awful, but just like inaccurate based on my personal experience and just what I believe to be true. But I it's something that I'm going to have her on so she can like, share her point. But it's like a very interesting way of looking, and it's not pure determinism. It's not like everything is already set out on a path and you will clearly play out that path. It's more of like a multi-infinite dimension viewpoint of everything having been created, and that what we feel we're acting on is by choice is actually just a pattern or energy that's expressing itself. And and I was like okay,
our anomalous action was pre-planned somewhere, that kind of like
somewhere, and not even like from a creator or something like that, but just like a series of natural or metaphysical phenomena that kind of, it's like the way she described it is the dust settling like after the big boom. Like that's what we're actually witnessing, rather than kind of a metaphysical stitching together of frames of reality, which is kind of what I believe. But
there's a kindness to that. Like I could see how like sometimes a little bit of that mindset can be really helpful in moments like lately where it's been really upsetting political situations or like war, or like you're like, why is this happening? And it's kind of like there's why is this person saying this like that? Why are they being so cruel or whatever? Like there can sometimes be a little bit of there was a trajectory of events that led up to this, and this was kind of inevitable, and we need to just wait for the next thing to happen because something else is going to happen to like equalize it. Or I don't know if that's, but I have a hard time not feeling like I'm making choices. Like
same. I mean, it's like it's impossible for me to not feel like that, and it's also very difficult for me to see how my life isn't a reflection of those choices that I've made internally. Like that is plainly clear to me. I think there's like an element of like non-judgment in the way of looking at reality like that.
That's what I meant.
And I think that's why I brought it up, because it sounds like that what you're saying, and I think there is an element of that, but to me that doesn't feel exactly like what's going on intuitively. So we kind of argue about this at various times, you know.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's nice to have that completely different perspective because, you know, it keeps you honest. It keeps you thinking about what you believe, and you don't just kind of blindly repeat, you know, what you've been saying without questioning it. So I like it from that aspect, and I like to hear people who have different opinions, and especially ones that we can't really prove, right? Like, we're not getting empirical evidence of either of those things outside of our own direct anecdotal experience, which is a little bit different. So yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff. So wait, I wanted to go, like, we spent a lot of time here just like talking, but I feel like I haven't asked you enough Vedic astrology questions, just because like I don't want to undersell, like, you know, I keep my Twitter lists tight, and you have been since the beginning like a very good follow for a lot of reasons. But, you know, for people who don't know, like, the stuff you share, not only about kind of aspects of Vedic astrology I hadn't heard about, like the horary stuff and like all the times and things, but you also like tend to do these reviews of like famous celebrities or figures in history and kind of break down their charts. And like, what leads you to like picking out someone's chart throughout history to be like, I want to see what the fuck is going on there? Like, what led you to, like, what is your curiosity based on? Is it the person itself? Is it like using it as a tool to kind of understand components of energies? But like, what's involved there? Like, when you like be like, you know, I'm going to look up Marilyn Monroe's chart and see what's going on here.
Yeah, so well, for me, the biggest thing is people who I know about their life. Because what I really get obsessed over, and this is probably going to be really boring for most people, is birth time rectification. And also, there's something called ayanamshas in Vedic astrology, and most Vedic astrologers use, basically, they start the zodiac at a certain degree based on an, I don't know if this is just going to be like too much.
No.
Okay, okay, cool. So they use an ayanamsha called lahiri, which is basically like, it's only one, like, it's like micro differences of degrees in the all of the various ayanamshas. But when you get into the divisional charts, it creates huge differences.
Of course.
So it's a big deal. So so I'm like, will get on like a mad spree of trying to either rectify somebody's birth time, or, which you have to use divisional charts to do that, and you have to use life events to do that. So it's helpful to know about their lives. Or I want to sort of test out which ayanamsha is better because I feel so strongly that the one I use is right. And it changes the planetary phases that you're in, the timing of the phases that you're in. So doing deep dives on these like people who, you know, their life events can really help. But also it's people who inspire me. So like I find Ted Kaczynski to be a really interesting person. Yeah, so I did, like, I wanted to rectify his time, and that was really interesting. Yeah, Jeff Buckley's, I think, really interesting person too, and I had a really good time with his. He has a really like mystical story going on. So yeah, it's very mathematical for me a lot of the times.
What led you to Ted Kaczynski? Like, what interests you in? I mean, for people who don't know, we're talking about the Unabomber. You know, a famous kind of anti. He wrote a whole manifesto on like kind of the dangers of society and where it was heading. What's your interest in Ted?
Well, honestly, I was just interested enough in him to learn about his life to use him as an example. But I mean, he's just so interesting because he's so coherent, and because he doesn't seem like a bad person. I think was the MK Ultra. I think they did MK Ultra experiments on him, and when he was in college. So I'm like, he's just a very interesting figure because, you know, if you read his manifesto, he's like, I understand that this is going to hurt people, but I've done a cost-benefit analysis, and the technology is actually worse. And it's just like, wow, like, he's a really unique individual. So I don't know. I just found him intriguing enough to learn about. Yeah.
That's cool. So are you doing readings? Are you like offering, like, I never really kind of like, you're not a self promoter. I think that's safe to say, but I think one of the reasons I absolutely wanted to have you on is because I feel like there are voices out there that like they're really, really good or put in true like energy and passion into what they do. And they might not have the skill of being able to like put themselves, like it's hard to ask people to market themselves when it comes to any of this type of work. But I mean, it's incredibly helpful and beneficial to a lot of people. And I know as someone who offers readings myself, like it helps us, like it helps the reader understand and get better and figure out like what's actually going on in these processes. So like, how do people, like if they want to connect with you, like what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so the best way is, I guess, through Twitter, probably. And I think, yeah, or my Instagram as well. But really, like, readings are very much like research projects for me. I mean, to be honest, I'm always learning, so I never ever feel like anything's done. So it's kind of like if someone wants a reading, it's done based on donation.
Cool.
Because I just feel like I'm still learning. The one type of reading that I feel really confident about and I can do really quickly and they can be really cheap is Arudhalagna readings, which are very much about like style, public image, branding. This is like about how to kind of, it's the one that has to do with how the world sees you. So anything to do with like questions about how to market oneself, that is the type of reading that I feel really comfortable with. So yeah,
I want
but
one of those. I
oh
want one
yeah,
of those. Like
oh
I'm
yeah,
totally on board.
yeah, that would
Name
be
the
fun.
price. I'm happy to do it. Yeah, because like that's something that I think a lot of people are just being forced to reconcile with, like with this digital age of like how people are online, and like how they are online is sometimes or often mixed with their businesses and their careers, and it's just like not everyone is great at that. Like it is a difficult thing to understand how even people perceive you, let alone like what to present in a way that communicates like what you're trying to communicate authentically. So that's cool.
Totally. It's
That's
fun.
cool.
It's like a little evil, but not too evil. It's sort of like, I don't know, there's something about it that's fun, like kind of superficial, but really quite deep. Like seeing how the world sees you is such a big deal because that's what they're going to know when you die. That's the story they're going to tell about you. This is like the role that people want to cast you in. So like
Yeah.
why not go in knowing how people want to see you and work with that when you're trying to make money?
Yeah, or just in anything in life. Like I feel like
Yeah.
when you have a better understanding of how you're being perceived, it can certainly help you know how to act in certain situations to, make it work a little bit better in ways that would be beneficial for everyone. So yeah.
Yeah, and also there are blocks. I mean, there are clear blocks that can be shown. So if somebody's feeling blocked, then there's remedies that you can do for that as well. So it's really helpful.
Well, I want to talk more about this. We should definitely schedule. Maybe you can come on for the Patreon or something, and
Yeah.
because I really like we're just scratching the surface here. Like I recognize and appreciate what you've been putting out like
Thank you.
regularly,
I
and like
appreciate that.
yeah, no, it's cool, and like I'm sure other people are noticing and paying attention too because it is Vedic astrology in particular is like you mentioned, it is really complex, right? Even the base level barrier into it requires somewhat of a perspective shift. And then like you're talking about micro degree stuff and rectifications, like, you can see it extends into the real like ether here, but it is very, very cool, and as one of the oldest forms of kind of like a divine art that exists, I think holds tremendous power. Like there's a reason it's still around. There's some energy behind it that has benefited people. So
Totally. It
I
definitely.
and, you're about as easiest of a point of contact for this type of information, which is probably the best thing I can say about it. It's presented in a way that is like, yes, you're dealing with, sometimes I don't know what the words are and I don't know exactly what you're talking about, but then like I'll either Google it or be able to understand it. And then I'm like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Or it's just like a plain observation that relates to something going on, that is a little more understandable for me, at least from the Vedic perspective. So I appreciate it. Besides Twitter, anywhere else you want people to connect with you? Is there anything else?
No, don't. My Patreon is not really functioning. I would just Twitter and then Instagram is good too. I think I'm just Bimbo Astrology on Instagram. So,
Cool.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm glad we got to do this. Let's set something up soon so if people have like, questions or they want to learn more, because I just feel like you have a good way of explaining this to people too. So,
Oh, thank you. I love that.
cool. Awesome.
The pain goes hard tonight, the city by the bay, as movie stars and flying to the moon again, flying to the moon
Hope you enjoyed that episode. You can go find Starlight at bimbo_astrology on Twitter and Instagram. Go follow her. She's good stuff. I'm trying to encourage her to do those readings she was talking about at the end, those style casting readings. Like, seems like something she's really interested in doing and good at, and we should encourage people to do that, eh? Don't you think? Anyway, that's it. Shout out to everyone on the Patreon. We're having fun. We will have a live stream tomorrow night. I think that's our crypto live stream. So it's not crypto exclusive, but we will be forecasting 2024 in terms of the crypto sphere, which is an interesting thing. Reminder, this is how bad a self-promoter I am. Reminder, I have a crypto course. So if you're like, yeah, I don't know about this crypto thing. I think it's maybe a scam, or maybe I'm kind of interested. I don't know. There is a course you can take, Conscious Crypto. You can find links to that pretty much wherever. Just search for it. Conscious Crypto, my name. That's it. I will see you guys next week. Until then, happy imagining.